It's more than I ever had wished for, you and me. I'm so lucky you found me. Now we're two hearts will be as one. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. I'm so happy I got lucky. I keep winning when you're around. I'm so lucky I got lucky, lucky with you. Lucky with you. Lucky with you. Lucky with you.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is our worldwide broadcast to be aired on Sunday, August 13th, 2017. And I say to be aired because, as you know, we have to accommodate the schedules of all of our incredible guests who are all over the world and doing things other than being on Lost Arts Radio. And we need their presence here with us. So today we have a special treat in the return of our friend Tom DeWeese, who's the president and founder of American Policy Center, which you can see at americanpolicy.org. We recently had his vice president on with his recommendation. That was Kathleen Marquardt, and we talked about some of the basics with her of Agenda 21, which we've had many shows on. And I wanted to get Tom on as soon as possible, and this week is perfect, and to talk about some of the aspects of Agenda 21 that reach specifically into private property, but also current developments in that whole realm, what he's mostly working on, what American Policy Center is doing, and I want to make sure and cover his incredible book, which I recently finished reading, and I would recommend to everybody. So welcome, Tom, and thanks for the time today. I appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Just to give a couple of minutes background to people that have not already become familiar with you and your work, why don't we say where American Policy Center came from, how you got involved in all that, and what it's focused on doing at this point, and why?
Sure. Yeah, I've actually been an activist for a lot of these causes since I graduated from high school. I hate to say this, but it's been about 49 years now that I've been doing this.
Oh, it's amazing how fast it is.
I started the American Policy Center back about, I think it was 1986. Okay. And at the time, we were, in the beginning, we were known as a Foreign Policy Center, and we went to, we were one of the first organizations to send a election observation team to Panama when Manuel Noriega stole the election there. Not a single vote was ever counted, but he claimed a victory, and I was there.
Right.
And we worked with freedom fighters in Angola. I actually met with the Contras and different things like that. So those were kind of exciting times. Then I got involved in the education issues. We were, under Bill Clinton, we were seeing the Goals 2000 School to Work, workforce development programs, and we worked very hard to try to stop all those programs. We obviously weren't successful, but that's what we were working on. But as I was doing that, I began to really get concerned about the so-called environmental movement and things they were doing and the effect that it had on private property rights. And it was about that time we changed the name of the organization to American Policy Center so that we could get involved in these kinds of issues.
I bet you that most people wouldn't even think of those two concepts together, anything to do with property rights having, any relation to environmental issues.
Well, part of the thing was that I started working with a lot of folks out in the West, ranchers, people in the timber industry, mining industry, and seeing what they were going through. The West and the large areas of open space there and the smaller populations was a first target. They hadn't started moving into the cities yet and affecting things there. So these were the first people who were in the line, and particularly one of the big issues came up was the whole issue over the spotted owls, that endangered spotted owls, and they literally were shutting down the timber industry, and that was affecting whole communities that lived off of it. Communities that lived off their sawmills and things like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. These were people desperate because of these kinds of regulations, and that's so I began to see that from that aspect, and it's just grown from there.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing, because that's kind of like climate concerns. People would think, oh, well, that's obviously legitimate. And you can just imagine all these vicious loggers rounding up the spotted owls and then just killing them one at a time in cold-blooded manner. And that may not be a completely accurate picture of what's really happening.
Not. One of the arguments that they kept putting forth was that spotted owls could only live in old-growth forests, meaning forests that were not where they weren't cut, the trees weren't cut.
Yeah.
And so that became the argument. You can't cut any trees because you're damaging these. I can tell you several fairly funny stories about all this and how absolutely crackpot that is. First of all the spotted owl needs to survive is a food supply. Mm-hmm. And as long as they've got that, they're fine. They found spotted owls living in McDonald's signs, under bridges.
Wow.
These are not old-growth forests.
That's not even an old-growth McDonald's, probably recent construction.
Right. Well, they used to have the bigger signs, so maybe that helped.
Oh, okay.
But the funny thing is, well, first of all, the spotted owl is not endangered. It is a derivative of another similar species, and so it's not endangered. It is, they just made this up, mm-hmm. and in fact, they even said, "Gee, if it weren't for the spotted owl, we'd have to make up something else." The whole goal was to stop the timber industry.
I think that's a major problem in people following what you're saying. Because wait a minute, what was that middle part about some authority figure who works selflessly 24 hours a day to serve the public, and they're making things up? I mean, how could that be? It's just let me tell you something. Let me give you this quote. The Club of Rome, which is one of the main global organizations working closely with the United Nations to come up with these programs, they said in a report at that time, the common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So they came up with the idea. What do? We've got several people saying things like, it doesn't matter what is true, it only matters what people believe is true. That was by Paul Watson, who's the co-founder of Greenpeace. Others said, we've got to follow this global warming issue wherever it goes. Doesn't matter if it's real or not. We need this issue to move forward with our plans. So this is the mindset. One of the hardest things to see about it is there's always mixtures of statements that are true. So it's not like a black and white thing. But when you bring up the enemy of humanity is man, since that's not extremely logical, you have to have another element of this whole thing, which is education, so that people will be taught how to not need to be logical anymore, right? And I think we've got a really good system in place for that now.
Yeah, well, obviously that takes us right into the next issue, and what I said I was working on earlier, the whole public education system. With the advent of the Department of Education under Jimmy Carter, the local education control, your local school boards, even your state control, was thrown out the window, and the federal Department of Education began to dictate curriculum, dictate policy. And where we have gone with that now is academics are a secondary thing, if even thought of, just very, very basic academics. But getting into history, getting into philosophy, getting into economics, reading, writing, arithmetic, all those things are out. It's behavior modification. And, one of the keys to teach you that is we used to have examinations. We would take an exam on what we had learned. Now we have assessment tests. That's a psychological thing, assessment tests. The testing that they do now is to test to see how the child is accepting and beginning to go into the behavior modification. Do they have the right attitudes, values, and beliefs? Not can they read? Do they understand English? Or do they understand philosophy or anything like that?
So these are federal tests, and they're given at all the local schools in every state? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, and many of these tests, children or parents are not allowed to see. The schools have become big data mining centers to get all the information they can about the children, their families, attitudes, values, beliefs. That's the key to it.
So, I remember the tests that we used to have when I was in elementary school and afterwards, and they had some IQ tests to see if your brain was working very well, but they also had tests in all the basic subjects. They did teach history then, and they taught, math and English and all the basics. And when I was in school a long time ago, that was already, that was just assumed. And when you talk about the Department of Education federalizing this, and that department only started existing after Jimmy Carter, most people would, I think, assume that there's always been a Department of Education. That's what the federal department controls. But that's not exactly true, huh?
No, there was none until then, until Jimmy Carter was president. Ronald Reagan had promised to get rid of it. He was the next president, that was a big campaign promise, but he didn't do it. It's kind of like is happening to Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan was surrounded by these guys who wanted these programs in place, and that was one reason that they stuck George H.W. Bush on the team with them, to run as vice president, to keep an eye on him, to keep control. I know that sounds radical, but that's exactly what they did. And
what's really happening is pretty radical, actually, compared to what we're taught.
Well, absolutely. And so we ended up, as all this started in real earnest efforts on it, when Bill Clinton was elected in 92, there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Tucker. He was the head of a organization called the National Center for Education and the Economy. He wrote an 18-page letter to Hillary Clinton. And he was so excited. He outlined the opportunity that the Clinton administration had to remold the entire American system. Those are his words. And he provided a detailed blueprint. It became the what was known as the Dear Hillary letter. And he outlined exactly what they could do to change our nation and its citizens from training children from a very young age to properly serve the global economy. I mean, those are his words in it. And so they began to set this up. This is where school to work came from. Schools began to be changed away from academic centers to preparing children for jobs. And part of what they came up with was, well, if you're going to be a hairdresser or you're going to be in, name, whatever it might be, well, you're not going to need history or philosophy or things like that. So we're going to have you this particular kind of a curriculum we're going to give you. And one of the programs they came up with was called Transition. And there's absolutely no academic significance whatsoever here. Its purpose is to strip search the children for their attitudes and their values and their ideas, and begin to mold them so that they did not question authority. And now you take a look. Now these things have been in place. Right now we've got there's another program that this year they're really emphasizing. It's called Social Emotional Learning, or SEL. It's what's called the whole child approach. Again, Doesn't have any academics in it. It's all about attitudes, values, and beliefs. Now, you take a look at what you're seeing coming out of our colleges right now, and I mean, you know, the incredible. They've got to have, you know, they have to have some chewing gum and some Play-Doh and some, you know. They've got to be comforted because somebody has a different idea than what they have.
I mean, just in case people think you're kidding, why don't you explain what you mean?
And what do you mean? The examples of what we're talking about?
And you said Play-Doh and something else, and don't forget there's crayons in there too. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah. They got to color. They have to have safe spaces. There was a story during the campaign that someone had written on the sidewalk the name Donald Trump. The children needed therapy. These were college kids.
I have to hold on to the chair here so I won't be too triggered when you say that, but go ahead.
They needed therapy on this. And one of the things, that give the children some Play-Doh, give them, you know, comfort them, give them safe spaces.
These are like 20-year-olds. They're not 4-year-olds. Exactly. We are seeing, you know, we talked back in those days, back in the 90s and so forth, about the dumbing down of education. You want to see the education people go through the roof, say the words dumbing down. But what have we done? If you're not teaching them well-rounded academics, then what else have you done? And this is what's happened. Watch, you know, Jay Leno used to have jaywalking, where he'd go around and ask people questions like, in what year was the War of 1812 fought? You know, starting
like
with really hard ones, yeah.
Yeah, who did we fight in World War II? You know, things like this. And they have absolutely no idea. They don't know who the president is. They don't know, you know, what's the Supreme Court do. They have no clue. This is because they have
Mark
never
Dice
been
has
taught
done
that.
some good ones on that, too. I'm assuming you've seen Mark Dice's work, right?
You have that, and you have, what's his name, Waters, Waters World. He's famous for going around and asking these kind of questions, too. I mean, a lot of people think it's funny. It's not funny. It is tragic. And and this is what we're dealing with. So now you have adults now, clear up into their 40s, who have been affected by this kind of education, and these are the people now voting. These are the people now deciding on, you know, where our country should go, and now we have this massive division of people. And why is that? Because of this so-called curriculum from the schools. We have created I use a term all the time, and it's meant to be sarcastic, but what we have created is the perfect global village idiot. They don't understand anything about what the United States, why it was founded, what was created. They only understand, is you talk about history, well, there was slavery. And those guys who created this country, they were a bunch of old slave owners. The Constitution, well, that's an old document. Those people who wrote it couldn't possibly understand the problems we have today, so we need to move beyond that, on and on. All of it is designed to destroy the foundation of what was the United States of America, a republic. If they would study what a republic was, if they understood what that was, they would understand that if you're a minority of one, your rights are protected. That's the purpose of it.
It's not a democracy at all, right? You don't want it to be a democracy. But
democracy appears nowhere there.
I just have to ask you one question about that whole sequence that you went through fairly quickly. And people forget that the tradition in America that really had a lot of validity to it is that in small communities, most of which were built around farming, which was quite normal all over the country, they got together in their communities and found the best people qualified to be teachers because of their character and knowledge base. And it was one or more than one, and they got some little building that they could meet in, kids of all different ages interacting with each other, which was really actually good for many reasons. And they started teaching them the basics. And that, you know, just because they had a schoolhouse that was small with no electricity and they didn't have millions of dollars in grants doesn't mean they couldn't have had a really good education. And what I'm wondering about is, instead of enhancing that tradition. What was wrong with Jimmy Carter that he wanted to turn it over and create the Department of Education? Do you have any idea where that came from?
It came from several sources. One of the main catalysts for the Department of Education was the National Education Association, the Union of Teachers, and they, of course, they give lots and lots of money to, particularly to the Democrats and Jimmy Carter, and so this was, was a payback for that, for one thing.
Oh, okay.
But if you look at the system that they use, it is very, very close to the system that the Soviets used. So it's kind of identical. And, of course, there's also, through the United Nations, there's UNESCO. And UNESCO is the education arm of the United Nations. And just a few years later, after all this, George W. Bush put together No Child Left Behind. His Secretary of the Department of Education addressed a UNESCO meeting and told them that No Child Left Behind is in complete compliance with UNESCO education policies. So there you have it. It's that's what it is.
Okay, so what kind of policies would those be?
Those are that we do away with sovereign independent nations, that we are all global citizens. That's and that's Common Core today. The whole focus is on globalism and global citizenship. But again, I may have told you this once before. I don't remember. There's an organization out of the United Nations called the Eden Foundation, and they advocate what is called globally acceptable truth. And globally acceptable, the way they sell it is that in fact, the head of the Eden Foundation said to me in an email one day, the reason we have wars and strife and poverty is because there's too much knowledge. People have a hard time making decisions because all this stuff is thrown at them. So globally acceptable truth, we will put together what you should believe. And in other words, we'll answer all your questions for you. You won't have to worry about that. You can just go on with your life and live.
Okay, so that makes life way more efficient than before they started that project, I guess.
And the entire education system is literally based on that model, globally acceptable truth. There was a time when I first started my political activism that I went into schools. I was invited in to talk about free enterprise and private property rights and that sort of thing, and freedom. And today, I'm not allowed anywhere near a school. Now, it's just me. It's anybody who has the ideas that I do. The Heartland Institute out of Chicago, which has done a lot of work on trying to expose the lie of global warming. And they put together booklets to go into the classrooms. They sent them to science teachers all across the country. Caused a huge uproar. Heartland's trying to buy their way in and put their lies in front of the kids. We're not going to allow this to happen. So in other words, you're not allowed to have both sides of a debate and let the kids listen to both sides and understand there are two sides. Not allowed. Yeah. Globally acceptable truth. This is all you're allowed to know.
Wow, pretty interesting. So now, at this point, kids are losing touch with history and with the basic academic skills and subjects and communication, reading and writing and things like that. And they're basically learning the correct attitude to have toward global government, I guess, from what you're saying, right?
Yeah, because that fits in with everything else that's happening in our communities and so forth. We talk about Agenda 21. Well, the education arm is vital because you look at it from their point of view, the people promoting this, let's just call them the globalists that are looking at this. We've had since the beginning of time, since human society, there's always been somebody who's been trying to take over and control and rule. We had Napoleon and we had Stalin and we had, and you go back farther and farther in history, Genghis Khan, whatever. We always have these people that want to control and rule. And ask yourself the question: what if there was a system in place where they never had to fire a shot. They never had to start a war to do any of this. They could get the people to accept their revolution, to accept their control, and actually greet it gladly and say, come on in, yeah, we need this. This is exactly what these guys have done. And they are, first, you get a hold of the education system so that you get the perfect global village idiots that accept it all. Right. And once you've done that, now you can bring in the smart growth programs that actually dictate where you live, how you live, and eliminate private property, eliminate free enterprise, and the very foundations of freedom. And individuals disappear. We're not an individual. We're all alike. We're all together.
Right.
And
well, also you have to bring in the concept of fairness too, right?
Well, yeah. Everything. But I keep every time you hear that fairness. But what about my attitudes? What about what I believe in? Well, that's just racist. We don't need that.
Well, yeah, you just need re-education. That's all.
Yeah.
But freedom results in complete unfairness, right?
Yeah. Well, take it back to this. I like to use this example. Alexander the Great and Thomas Jefferson lived in the same world. They both, even though they were 1,000 years apart, they both still traveled at the speed of a horse. They both lit their homes with a candle. Now, you go up 100 years past that, and we were still pretty much there, and along comes a guy named Thomas Edison, and then Henry Ford, and then the Wright brothers. All of a sudden, chaos reigned. We had, everything changed. We moved at the speed of light to completely change our society. This upsets their well-ordered society. And if you begin to read their documents, read what they say and so forth, they pretty much tell you, we want to make sure we never again have these radical thinkers like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and the Wright brothers. And, that's because they can't control that. If you have a mind that thinks that freely to go in that direction, then you've got a danger there.
Right. So they have to control technology and make sure that they keep it within appropriate circles away from the general public, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Other than what is allowed for the regular people. Yeah.
Maurice Strong, who was the chairman of the UN Earth Summit, and until he passed away, almost every road led to Maurice Strong and down these lines. He said, current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. In other words, we have to stop that. Some others have said we got to make sure that there never again is a United States to influence the rest of the world. Our whole attitude, as I started to say earlier, picture, their dilemma that most of the world is set up, most of the countries in the world are set up to where government dictates and tells you what your rights are. And what rights you have today really depends on what gang's in charge at that moment. Right. The United States was almost the only nation created that was based on the idea of government's job is to protect rights you were born with, that you are an individual, that free enterprise is the means and private property ownership is the means to eliminate poverty and build individual wealth and so forth. And free enterprise is how the average individual can gain from his own labor that he benefits from that. The only place on the earth I live. So now they want to put this plan together to rule the world, basically, with this whole globalist scheme. And here's this darn United States of America sitting in front of them. What do we do about it? First thing we have to do is change the attitudes, values, and beliefs there. And, so the education system had to be changed, and they were very successful in getting that done, and it is rampant now, and now you see these people questioning, what are they questioning? Free enterprise, individuality, private property. So here we go. They did it. Mission accomplished.
And beyond questioning it, they're just saying that it's bad, right?
Yeah. That's the only thing you're allowed to believe. Globally acceptable truth, free enterprise, individuality. Individuality is dangerous. Free enterprise is racist. And private property is a social injustice.
And globalism means world peace.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if you only have one country that covers the world, how can you have a war?
Exactly. That is exactly how they think. And some of the early writings that they said, we have to get rid of nation states. That's the source of war. And so exactly right, that we just, one global society, then we won't have any reason for these wars.
Right. So, boy, I think if you've got that kind of a proposal and people who are trained not to question anything anymore, then the idea is that it just, marches toward completion. And if you can see within that context why certain other things are being done in the world, financial collapse and invasion of terrorists encouraged by governments and things like that, because if they can create chaos, then the people will theoretically beg them to hurry up with the world government.
Always make sure that in their minds, that they are the answer to the problem.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The answer is always more government control. We'll take care of this for you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Jimmy Carter was really an important person in developing this whole new system of education, right? I mean, almost like Woodrow Wilson with the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it started. I mean, unfortunately, Ronald Reagan didn't follow through and get rid of it, so he helped, I hate to say it, but he helped too, putting that in place.
Well, Reagan's attitude changed a lot when he was almost killed. I mean, he was talking. He was talking a lot about. He said government is the problem and all this stuff, and he didn't really keep saying that stuff after they shot him.
Yeah, he accomplished most of what he was going to accomplish in the months before that happened, and he was absolutely revolutionary in the things he did. But you're right, things began to back off there. It's also the influence. For example, I have a personal acquaintance who was a major activist at the time, helped get Ronald Reagan elected, and he was given the position of being the guy inside the White House who was the contact for the conservative movement, the people who helped elect Ronald Reagan. He didn't last a year in there. The job was done away with, and it's so identical to what you're seeing happening today in the Trump administration, that isolate the president. He's dangerous. Don't allow these ideas to spread. Get rid of anybody who supports them. Everything. It's very similar. It wasn't as violent. It wasn't as open back under Reagan, but the same things did happen.
Yeah. I remember meeting Reagan when he was governor in California. He was giving a talk at a university where I was a student, and even then, the kids were being brainwashed into these basically communist groups, thinking that they were working for freedom, and that anarchy was the way to go, violent anarchy, getting rid of anybody that disagreed. And SDS and other groups were working on that at that time. But so Students for Democratic Society was one of the groups, and there were other ones. So this has been in the works for quite a while, I guess, right?
Yeah. That was where the real radicalization of it began to take place, was in the 60s. I was on the campuses then. I was fighting the SDS, trying to stop the riots and that kind of thing. We had hand-to-hand combat on more than one occasion, believe me.
Well, the SDS and other groups were thinking that they would probably have to kill something like 25 to 50 million Americans that were put in the re-education camps and were too uncooperative to be re-educated. Yeah,
and see, when all that took place, it kind of ended as we got into the 70s, and people thought, oh, yeah, well, those are just dumb kids, and they've gone off to have jobs and so forth. Not true. What they did was the real leaders, the real radicals of it, went into the education system, became college professors, that sort of thing. They went into the news media. They went into corporations. Who was their number one enemy? Business. They went into corporations. Now what do we see? Global corporations that are promoting these very same ideas. Why? Because those guys went in there and were very successful in turning things around to their agenda.
Yeah. And there's also now there's a very, I think, positive, well-meaning group of people that have some big holes in their understanding, and they say that really, since government is doing all these terrible things, which it is, that the answer is anarchy. And the problem with that is the people who are really pushing it and starting it have the resources to hire all their own private security and to be in the elite, under the anarchy. At least that's their idea. But most people would just be totally subjugated by violent groups doing exactly as bad things as government does now. So I think
you just end up with tribes being created, and tribal wars is what it really comes down to. Through all those years, I've gone through all that. I went through the anarchy moment, that kind of thing. And definitely not an anarchist. And
I think the same debate was happening at the foundation of the country, right? I mean, some people were saying,
sure.
Well, it's possible that if we make a federal government, it might someday become corrupt. And so they tried to put safeguards in how the whole structure was formulated, but they ended up deciding that they had to have a government with a certain amount of power to protect the individual rights of the people, which otherwise wouldn't hold up.
Yeah,
right?
I heard a very interesting discussion the other day on that very subject. The question was, what mistake did the founders make? And the person that I was listening to said the real mistake they made was that they honestly believed that if they created a country, a system where people were prosperous, where they weren't hungry, they weren't threatened by government, they weren't threatened by outside influences, whatever, that they would be in harmony, they would be happy, and they wouldn't want more government. And they misunderstood that that wouldn't be the case. And so they didn't really prepare the government to handle the kind of corruption that comes from that kind of thing. The greed. What we really deal with here is the greed that one of the founders said, once the government figures out, and the people in the government figure out that they can take money from the people, and then they create programs where other people can live off that money. Once they figure that out, then the republic is dead. There's no putting it back in the bottle. And that's why they thought that if they created a country where everyone could be prosperous, then nobody would be wanting that money anyway. Yeah. And but these are clever guys who know how to build this kind of power. And once they get the money in their pockets and they control it, then they can buy whatever they want. And there is still the greed factor, and that's really the source of it.
What about all the people that are not understanding why we definitely never want to live in a democracy, and you get a clue of that because the media, which is the mouthpiece of those global corporations that you're talking about, and is under no obligation to tell the truth. They're always saying that they're using the phrase "our democracy," and this threatens our democracy, and we have to, get our democracy back. And democracies, of course, have to be fair, and it keeps going on from there. But can you explain to people who are not clear on that why you would never want America to be a democracy and it wasn't set up to be one?
Democracy is three wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. Is really what it boils down to. It is a lynch mob. Huh?
Right. I was going to say the sheep might convince all the wolves, but it's probably not too likely.
I don't something. So it is, and this is exactly what we're talking about. When you can get, majority rules means that you never have a solid foundation. The majority rules, then it's just a matter of what gang can convince the majority to follow them. I mean, this is what Hitler did, and nobody ever thought he could ever rise to power, but he did it. And so you end up with this gang in charge, and they're able to manipulate through propaganda, through handouts, through special favors, whatever it is, and buy people to go in their direction. Once that happens, the individual has absolutely no sound footing whatsoever. Your property, your business, your job, anything like that, your family is not safe when they can convince enough people. It doesn't matter what everybody thinks. That's wrong. We're going to take it from them. And in the republic that our founders set up for us, it was done under the idea that you are born with your rights, that you have a right to the fruits of your own labor, that you have the right to own and control your own property and build a business or whatever it is you want to do, as long as you're not in hurting somebody else doing the same thing, whatever, have a right to do that. And it's government's job to make sure that those rights are never violated. And that's how our government was set up. This is why the local government was given the most power, and the federal government was given very, very limited power. There's just certain things the federal government should be allowed to do, and that includes no Department of Education. It wouldn't be there. There wouldn't be any HUD. There wouldn't be any EPA, all these things. None of those things are enumerated in the Constitution. But on the local level and on the states, what people don't understand is that the states are the ones that created the United States. They were all. Why does every state have its own constitution? Because they were all sovereign states, and each state could set up the way they wanted to, and frankly, you as an individual were free to leave there. I don't like the way New Hampshire's run. I want to go to Arizona, and or vice versa. And you had that right. These states could have abortion. These states could have higher taxes. But when you started doing it one size fits all, then the individual disappeared. Freedom of choice disappeared. And the controls over government began to leak out and take control, and those controls over it were abandoned.
So what did they build into the federal government structure to prevent corruption from taking over?
One of the great things that led to that was the 17th Amendment, which in the early days, the Senate was picked by the states. So the senators were the states' representatives. The House of Representatives were the people's representatives. So you had a balance there. The states and their interests were represented, and the people's interests were represented, and the House and the Senate could fight it out. And but the states chose who their senators were. They repealed that under the 17th Amendment and made the senators elected by the people. What you really did was create a House of Lords. Now they're in there for 6 years. They have their own set of rules. They have and when you're in there for 6 years, you got all kind of time to build means to make sure you're never out of there. And look what we have today. We have senators that don't represent the states. That the states have become, since that, just an entity. It's not even important. It's whatever, the state over there. But now we're starting to move to create regions instead of states.
Right. And 6 years is only per term, right? I mean, they could stay much longer than 6 years. Oh,
well, yeah, and they do. I mean, look at these guys, 30 and 40 years, some of them in there. Right. And, so the other thing that happened was in the House of Representatives, there is a very systematic thing in the Constitution that says, how many people one representative should represent. But as it got up there to where the population was growing, they didn't want to keep increasing the size of the House chamber, so they made it so you had districts, and it didn't matter how many people were in it. You had one congressman, that was his district. So what did that do? That took government farther away from the people, and instead of having a very limited number of people that representative represented, and now it's he's so big that he's out of the question.
Yeah, exactly. You've got people within a given district with every point of view. It's pretty hard to actually represent the whole thing.
Yeah. So those two things completely upset the apple cart of what the founders created, that was to be a real representative republic, and and the states being the center of that. The states created the federal government. There was great consternation by members back then, when the new Constitution was put together and everything, the debates they had over making sure that they protected state sovereignty. And that's slowly but surely that has been taken away, and now there is no such thing as state sovereignty.
Right, and the states are also now webs of corporations, essentially, right, legally.
That has moved in that direction too, as has the federal government. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea that the states were the safeguard against corruption is not as likely when the states are completely compromised themselves at this point.
Yeah, the states are it's just another entity there, but it's it's a nice thing to talk about, but they really don't have any power. The federal government, Department of Education, we have 50 state departments of education, but the federal Department of Education dictates to them policy. We have 50 EPAs, but the federal EPA dictates to them what policy will be. And, they have the money, the big grants, they have the guns, they have the power to enforce all that. And so that's what happens.
So the states have kind of become subdivisions, or at least obedient servants of the federal government structure.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, and then also, I think in most states, if not all, the counties and cities are legally subdivisions of the state government.
That's correct, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So by stages, handing on this power on this system of waterfalls going down, the local governments are now, in a way, indirect subdivisions of the federal government.
Well, that's exactly what's happened. For example, one of the best examples, just recent, and we've talked about this before, is Housing and Urban Development's program, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, AFFH, this program. First of all, let me back up just a minute. When Agenda 21 was announced and George H.W. Bush signed it, it was not a treaty. It was what's called a soft law policy. A soft law policy is merely a suggestion. Here is what we would like to see. And him signing that document with 179 other heads of state said, we think this is a good idea. This is good. But once he did that, then they said they'll tell you today that that Agenda 21 has no enforcement capability. That it's just silly to talk about it because it's just local, it's voluntary, it's not a big deal.
Yeah,
well, that's not true. Here's why it's not true. The next thing that happened was Bill Clinton was elected, and he created the President's Council on Sustainable Development. The President's Council, its job, its purpose, was to make Agenda 21 regulations and the suggestions from it, make them laws, make them rules, regulations. On that President's Council were all these agencies, the EPA, the HUD, the Department of Interior, on and on and on. They were all part of that. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, all that, as well as the non-governmental organizations like the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, that helped write Agenda 21. They were all on that council, along with major corporations. The head of Enron was on the President's Council. And, what do? They all put plans together that grew all of their little fiefdoms. And they created grant programs that had these specific strings attached that if you take this grant, then you have to do this and this and this. We control how much energy you use. We control what kind of building materials you use. We control populations around certain places. All these things were in these grants. Now they said, well, it's just voluntary. But what they did was then they went into the states. The same NGOs that did it on the federal level went into the states, and they lobbied to get the states to create regulations that said every community needs to create a comprehensive development plan. And they did. Now they went into the community and they said, oh, golly, we're here to help you. Here's a community, here's a city councilman saying, what the heck is a comprehensive development? What do you mean? What do you want? Oh, don't worry about it. We've got it all right here in a box for you, and we got the money for you, too. You don't even have to think. Boom, boom, boom. They did this.
In fact, it's a lot better if you don't think, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, and that statement is truer today than it was when they did this. So all these communities take these grants. They're told they're just voluntary. What was interesting was over several years of doing that, even though they had these strings attached, federal government wasn't imposing or forcing them to do all that. To put all the strings in place.
Okay.
There was efforts to do that, but they weren't enforcing it. Along comes a case in Westchester County, New York, where a non-governmental organization, it consisted of two people, by the way, a man and wife, but they created this organization. They started looking at the grant programs that Westchester County had taken, and they're looking at those strings, and they're saying, wait a minute, they didn't comply to this. They're out of compliance. And they filed a lawsuit, and they won a $65 million lawsuit, of which a bunch of that money went into their pocket, that they were out of compliance. Suddenly, HUD, with this AFFH program, looked at it and said, wow, look at this. We've been remiss. All of a sudden, HUD starts filing lawsuits all over the country of cities that are out of compliance with their grant programs. HUD agents now control those communities, not city councilmen. That's how it's worked.
So now, even though it's totally voluntary and for your best interest, and you only do it if you feel like it, if you don't do it, you get sued. And the reason that that's possible is because as a city, so-called city, it means a few people telling you what to do in the city. If the city takes the grant money comes with a contract that you sign and maybe don't read. And then once you've signed the contract, you no longer control your own city.
Yeah, and what's happened is that because of these lawsuits, now you have city councilmen and county commissioners terrified to stand up and even speak out against it for fear of being sued. And you've got two schools of thought going on here. You've got that one where they're after they've taken the grant, they're afraid of what's going to happen, and they comply. They can't possibly not do it. But the other half of it, the beginning of it, is there's still these guys who on these councils and stuff who believe that this is free money, that if they don't take money, they're cheating their community.
Yes.
And we're just going to take it. And so you got both schools of thought that all lead to tyranny from the top.
So the way this is enabled at the very beginning, like the headwaters of a river, you find a mostly foreign-owned group that I think is called the Federal Reserve. And it's issuing money, made-up money that it just enters in a computer or prints in the minority of cases, and lends it to the federal government, creating a debt, and it'll give as much of that as needed to the federal government that then has all that money for grants. But it never really existed. It's just made up money.
Exactly. And then they'll come to collect, which is what they're doing now.
Yeah.
And, what do we do? Oh, my goodness. Look at all this money we owe. How do we pay it?
So a lot of the power behind the whole system is because of the scam of what's become banking.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
very much a part of it all. Yeah.
Where's all the money for grants going to come from unless you can make money out of thin air?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's and the grant programs are the Kool-Aid. They are spreading the poison. That's where it's coming from. And we are telling communities now, stop taking the grants.
And that's what it would come to. Yeah.
Yeah, they're terrified to do it. We've got some communities that are doing it, but you win in a couple of communities, and we win one over here to say, don't take the grants, be good, don't worry about this. Meanwhile, HUD's got 10 more communities that did. So we're
right, and they're also misleading the residents in the community to say, this bad representative is throwing away money that really should go to you. By not taking the grants, you got to get rid of that person.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they'll do. These non-governmental organizations, these are the shock troops. They wrote these programs at the UN level. They brought it into the federal level. They brought it to the state level. They brought it to the local level. And they are behind your elected officials in the back rooms. And, people like me go in and try to address a city council and talk to them about these things, and people are thrown out for questioning this stuff, and behind the scenes are these guys telling the city councilmen, oh no, don't listen to them, there's a bunch of crazy nuts, they're just conspiracy theorists, don't worry about that, and ignore them. And so what we end up getting now is what I talk about as the well-practiced eye roll and the sigh. You walk in there and say something about Agenda 21 or whatever, it's like,
another conspiracy theorist. Who let that guy in? Right?
Yeah, another nutcase. We'll move on. And but the interesting thing is, that's what we've been getting. But all of a sudden, now that these lawsuits have started and so forth, now I'm starting to get phone calls from city councilmen and county commissioners going, what do I do? How do we fight back? And so that
and this is after they signed up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're already in trouble. One of the good things that has happened is that over the years, as we fought this battle, and we've had lots of activists, we've had thousands of activists join the battle, they have decided, a lot of them have decided to run for office and have gotten elected.
Oh,
and these are the people I'm hearing from now.
And they're prepared not to take grants, right?
Yeah, they understand. Now, that doesn't mean that some of them don't get poisoned once they get in there. I talk a lot about the fact that you get not everybody who runs for office is an evil person. People run for office because they're involved in their community and they want to help. And they get in there. What's the first thing we do with a county commissioner or a city councilman or even a state legislator or a mayor when we elect them? We send them off to the National Association of City Councilmen or the National Conference of Mayors and whatever. And what are they hearing there? The same NGOs are at the microphone saying, here's the latest program that we've got, and hey, we've got sample legislation for you here, and here's how it works. And they come home, and as soon as they get home, they're met by representatives of the same group saying, hey, did you get the sample legislation? Okay, we're here. We got the money here for you. We got, here's everything ready to go. And after you've done that for a while, and everybody you're talking to and everybody you're listening to is talking the same language, then you begin to believe, well, this is a proper role of government.
Yeah, how could they all be lying, right?
Yeah.
How could they all be lying? That's unrealistic to think that.
Yeah. And then so the only discouraging word they hear is from somebody like me. Oh, the guy's a nut. That's not true.
Well, and
how many
people,
times have I heard that?
People often say, look, you're proposing that there's this vast, smoothly coordinated conspiracy, and we're looking at government. They can't even cooperate on anything. So, I'm sure you've heard this. So that's why the whole conspiracy thing is nonsense.
Yeah, just crazy. But
the people who can't agree on anything are just the outer level of the ones who are not pulling the strings, right?
I'm not sure I understand your.
Okay, well, I should explain this better. It's like many times people have told me that the whole conspiracy idea that there are these coordinated plans such as what you're describing is not happening, because if you look at Congress, they can't even agree on one idea. And so I'm saying that the reason that those apparently contradictory things exist is that the people who are just putting on the superficial show as supposedly representatives are not the ones that are organizing the coordinated effort to take away freedom.
Yeah.
They're the distraction.
No, they're not. You're right in that, and they're really working very hard to make Congress irrelevant. Not part of it. What we're really moving towards is the Supreme Court becoming the supreme law of the land, and even the president becomes nothing. He's just the one that carries it out. This whole idea that the Supreme Court hands down a ruling. The Supreme Court doesn't hand down rulings; they hand down opinions. So. And when they won't even question, well, the Supreme Court said this. Well, the point of it is the way it's supposed to be is the Supreme Court's real job is to look at legislation and see if it complies with the Constitution or not. Then they can say, well, we don't believe this complies, and it's Congress's job then to pass legislation that will comply, or back off on it or get rid of it or something. That's what's supposed to happen. But instead, we now have these guys on high deciding. They're making laws.
Well, and they're taking cases from a lot of people besides Congress. I mean, any big case can theoretically be accepted for hearing by the Supreme Court after it's been judged by a lower court, right? No matter what it is.
Yeah, but it should be in that lower court. Did the lower court decide on a constitutional basis or not? That's what the Supreme Court's supposed to be looking at.
Yeah.
But what happened was you have people like Stephen Breyer and Souter and these kind of people who started saying, well, we need to look how our laws fit in with international laws. How does that all fit together? That's when we began to break away, and that's what we have today. And so you've got the UN and these kind of programs. As I said a little while ago, we're talking about the dilemma that they had was here was this United States that doesn't fit with the rest of the world. Well, how do we fix that? Well, we need to harmonize the United States into what the rest of the world's like. How do we do that? Well, the Supreme Court starts looking at those international laws and how do these archaic American laws fit in with that, and they make those decisions, and boom, we have changed the whole structure of the United States.
Well, yeah, just the idea that the United States should fit into the rest of the world versus fitting into a system of ethics, that where the whole thing came from, is amazing that transition actually happened. That they're thinking that we should fit with the rest of the world at this point. Yeah.
But take any issue that we're dealing with today and put it on overlay. Immigration. We talk. Why do we? We have American laws that say, you can't just walk in this country. You've got to have a process. We have a process for that. Yeah. Well, the globalists say that immigration laws conflict with the natural migration of people. The global idea.
Right.
So there you have that. That's why we have that.
Completely unfair. As long as you mention that, two things. One is for new listeners or people who might not be clear on it. Some of these terms are used constantly without definition, and I'm not sure that everybody would really know what a globalist is or globalism. What is that?
Well, I would define it as one who wants to do away with sovereignty, independent nations, nation states, that sort of thing, that the United Nations is the central global government, and everything comes from there, and you'd still have a Congress, you would still have city council, but they are little Soviets, basically. They are just doing the bidding, they're the ones on the local level that are putting things in place, but these things are decided on high, and so you have that we don't have these individual things. They argue that individual nation states are the cause of wars, so forth, as we said earlier, but we all are under one little globe here, one little tent, then we all get along, just have a group hug, and it's just wonderful.
Exactly. So how are you? Why are you arguing against world peace? How does that work?
Yeah, it's interesting. When they say we're all together and we're all the same, but we're not. How do we deal with, for example, the war between Islam and Christianity, or the Jewish religions? How do you deal with that? Those are completely different. Of course, they will argue we'll get rid of the religions, and we won't have that problem anymore. We'll all believe the same thing, globally acceptable truth.
Yeah.
But what you have to do to make that happen is you have to eliminate the individual. You have to eliminate individual thought, ideas. Those are all dangerous. Where have we heard those kind of things before, that such things are dangerous? Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
We're not allowed to have anything that was against what the government dictates. And, that's what we have today. We are seeing this upheaval in this country because of, do we have these poor children that need to have their therapy because somebody had a different idea and so forth? Because we have two different ideas on how the world should be, how the nation should be, individualism versus globalism versus, we're all in this together versus I'm not in anything, brother. I'm going to live my own life the way I want to. That's a dangerous idea. We can't have people thinking that way. My gosh, do you know where that would lead? So individual thought is destroyed. And it all leads towards that, what I call the global village idiot, because they don't question authority. They don't even know there is a question. Wasn't it always so? And that's where we go with it.
Yeah, well, I know that dictatorial rulers have always been trying to get people to stop thinking. I remember in, was it Cambodia with Pol Pot, that he killed everybody with glasses because it indicated they might be able to read, and that would make the same kind of problem that you're talking about.
We have this kind of insanity all over the world, and these dictators like this that are unquestioned. Just imagine. I mean, the United Nations ruling everything. The United Nations was started as a club of countries, as a way, after World War II, we'd already had World War I, and now we had World War II, and people wanted a way, how can we solve these problems without a war? Can we get people around a table and talk? And that was the whole catalyst for the creation of the UN, that we'd have a place where we could sit and talk. But that hasn't become the situation in reality. It is... we're not. We've had more wars under the United Nations than we ever had before. Every single conflict that has arisen since the creation of the United Nations is still ongoing. That's the reason we have in North Korea. We could have defeated them in the Korean War and ended that. And annihilated their communist dictatorship and everything, and we could have a united Korea. Vietnam is another one. There was a dictation on the global level of don't take it any farther. We'll have a demilitarized zone. We'll have a demarcation here, and we'll leave it the way it is. And so, name a conflict where there has been a resolution. We've been fighting the war on terrorism in the Middle East for now going on our way to 20 years. There's no end to it. And so the United Nations, to end poverty and to bring us peace. We have more poor than we've ever had before, and we have more wars than we ever had before. You think maybe it just didn't work?
Well, if you're saying that the mechanism where, they put this top-down power structure in place and overcame the independence of local communities and things is basically economic, because all the local communities are accepting grants and agreeing to slavery, then there has to be at least partially an economic solution to it, right, if it's going to be turned around.
Well, and again, the economic solution is what the United States had. The idea of private property ownership has been proven time and time again as the means to eradicate poverty. If individuals are able to own private property, the United States this is where the difference was the United States of other nations of the world. Why are we so much wealthier than other nations? And we did it very, very quickly. Ancient nations didn't have the wealth of the people of the United States, even back in the 1800s, the beginning of the country. Why? How does an individual who doesn't have some big access to massive wealth, how do they build their own personal wealth? Private property ownership. And how is that done? It's through the equity in the property. Well, how do you get the equity in the property? We have, in every single county, we have a registrar's office, an office where all the property is registered and you can prove that it's yours. Once that is done, now you can claim ownership and you can get loans on that. 60% of the businesses in this country were created by people using equity to get loans to create their business. 60% of the people in this country were employed by companies that were started in that way. Step by step by step, people began to build their own personal wealth. But in other nations of the world, that is impossible to do. In Mexico, it takes you 25 years to get your property registered so you can be yours. In the Philippines, you have to come in and create a homeowners association, and everybody's agreed that you can have that property. Where is it? In one of the countries in South America, it cost you $1,200 to be able to start a business. Now, if you're already a poor person, where are you going to get $1,200 to start a business? We always joke about some of these third world countries where you have all these palms you have to grease to get anything done. This is the problem. They keep people poor, and you do have people who own property, or at least they've bought property, but it's not recognized by the government, so it's an underground economy. And Peru is what I was talking about.
Okay.
There is an economist named Hernando de Soto. He's a Peruvian economist.
Right.
He wrote a book called The Mysteries of Capital, Why It Works in the West and Nowhere Else. The point of it was that he went around the world checking on other countries, how people could own property or not. And he told me, I had a private meeting with him, he told me that in many of these countries he goes to, the leaders of the countries are encouraged to talk to him because he had a solution to solve their poverty problems. But he knew many times they didn't care what he had to say. They weren't listening. And they would sit down, and the first thing out of their mouths, of these leaders' mouths, would be, well, our people don't understand that whole thing, and they're not ready to own private property. And so we're not going to do that. What he did, he told me this story, and in one country, he didn't tell me which one it was, he knew he was going to have one of those kind of meetings. So before the meeting, he sent a team out in the neighborhood around the presidential palace, people knocking on doors saying, they would ask, excuse me, do you own this property? This is a country where private property did not exist. Okay. Every single person said, yes, I do. Yeah, well, what proof do you have of that? Some would have wills, some would have receipts, different things. They made copies of all this, and Hernando brought it in and put it down in front of this leader and said, let's get this out of the way right now. Your people understand private property. Now let's figure out a way we can let them have it.
Wow. And what happened after that?
I don't know. He didn't go beyond that, but that is just that kind of an attitude that our people they don't understand this. Let's get past this.
Yeah, well, it's tied to their motivation for everything they're doing is partly to have some kind of a home and property and business property to use, right? So they're going to understand it because it's a high priority.
The problem we've gotten to is that with all the usurpation of private property rights, the use of your property, you now are to the point where all you think private property is you got the right to pay the taxes and pay the mortgage. But somebody else is going to decide every single thing that happens on that property. That's not private property rights.
Well, even just calling constant required payment taxes doesn't make it any different than rent, right?
Yeah. No, it's what we and now with these sustainable policies, these globalist policies that are coming down, the smart growth policies, there is no private property in our communities.
Yeah.
You're a renter. You're paying rent, the right to stay. As long as you make the payment, then you can stay there. But everything else is decided. I was in New York City a few weeks back, and I was at a special event where I was pitching these ideas to major media people, and I was actually pitching to a radio host on CBS Radio New York, and we were standing in this ballroom in downtown Manhattan, and there's big windows that went from floor to ceiling, and you could see the city outside the windows. And I said to him, I said, take a look out that window. And he turned around and he looked, and I said, out there are, you see all those buildings, all the property, you've got people paying taxes, and you've got people paying their mortgages. But and as far as your eyes can see, there is not a single private property right in your line of vision. I said, every decision made about that property is made by somebody else in a closed door someplace outside that doesn't own the property. He turned around and looked at me and said, we got to get you on.
Yeah.
But this is the case. This is what we're facing. The Kelo decision in 1995 decided that private property ownership doesn't exist, that it's the common good of the community. If the community can benefit by bulldozing your community, your neighborhood with eminent domain and building a much more expensive high-rise condo community there, and the community gets more taxes, well, that's for the common good, so therefore that's okay. We can do that. What you have for the first time was the Supreme Court of the United States deciding that private interests, like private developers, could take private property if the community, in a public-private partnership, worked with them, that the community was going to benefit more from that. They could do that. That destroyed the very concept of private property in the United States.
So that precedent is still sitting there, right?
It is. Now, as soon as that decision was made by the Supreme Court, a whole lot of states did pass legislation to overturn it, basically, and solidify private property. At least a lot of states introduced such legislation. It was passed in a few. Virginia was one. Okay. But they have a way of getting around those kind of things as time goes by, and they keep pointing to the Supreme Court, of course. But yeah, that was done. Yeah.
So some of the states are trying to resist it. But
it was so blatant. I mean, here you have these 7 justices who have no other job but to read the Constitution. They don't have to worry about getting reelected or appointed. They don't have to worry about their job. They're there for life, and all they got to do is look at this piece of legislation and look at the Constitution. Say, does it match? How hard is that?
Well, so one of the things might be, they're so incompetent they can't do that. But the other possibility is they are a prime target of all kinds of interests that want to corrupt them, I would imagine.
Sure, right. And they already come in with their own agenda. If you get a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama, the people that you're going to appoint to the Supreme Court are going to have your political bent.
Yeah,
and so it's been too long that way. And then we get certain people on there who you might think would be a good guy this way, and then they get on there, and then they, like you say, the influence starts, and they go in the other direction. So we end up with the problems we have. Yeah.
So it sounds like one of the key elements of any kind of workable strategy to reverse complete slavery would be to get people elected locally who don't accept grants, or who, when a grant is offered to the so-called city, the people running it, they would say, okay, let's read the contract line by line and see what it is you're wanting to pay us for, instead of the free money idea. And I suspect those contracts are probably pretty complex and long.
Oh, and try to read what they really mean. The AFFH program, there's no real definition about what affirmatively furthering fair housing is. They make it up as they go, basically. So it's very, very difficult to comply, because what are you complying to? Westchester County, New York, did everything they could to try to comply, and when the challenge was up, and it was just thrown out. Oh no, this you didn't put in this kind of a program. That's racism, because you don't have certain elements of the community don't have full access to this program or something.
So in other words, you can't just go line by line through the contract and see what you'd have to comply with and have some clarity that way?
Not exactly, because you've got to have to get a real understanding. What does this line mean?
Mm-hmm.
As Bill Clinton says, what's your definition of is?
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on whose interpretation, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I'm a very, very strong advocate of working at the local level, rather than spending all of your energy trying to elect presidents or congressmen. Mm-hmm. I believe, and I've seen this happen. First of all, the way our country was set up, and the advocates of these bad policies know this. The way our country was set up is that the local level is supposed to have the most influence on you, because that's where you could get the closest to your elected officials. You could actually sit down and have breakfast with your county commissioner and say, John, this is not working for me, and let me tell you what the problem is. That's the way it was set up to be. But we are getting farther and farther with regionalism set up and everything. That takes government farther from the people. But I'm a strong advocate that that's where you have to start. It's still the easiest place to overturn some of this stuff. Okay. And I have seen, when you begin to work on the local level and make differences, eventually that begins to work up. Now you've got a state rep saying, hey, in one of the communities in my district, they've done this, and we need to do this, and it begins to move up. And once you do that, and a state begins to do it, then you affect a congressman, you affect a senator, and so it can work its way up. And I believe that's the way we have to do it.
One of the things that I had wanted to ask you, you mentioned, I think, in various ways that most of what the federal government is doing now is illegal by their own constitution. Although I doubt. I mean, there's so many things I want to ask at once. If the federal government violates the Constitution, I think a problem seems to be that there's no official penalty for that, right? I mean, they're supposed to be stopped by the Supreme Court, but there's no penalty if they're not.
That's right, yeah. And that's a major, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a major issue. And, these guys are just doing whatever they want with no consequences. And one of the things that I've been advocating is that, especially on the local level and even on the state level, but on the local level, let's say a city council or a county commission has put one of these regulations in place that really damages your life in some way, your property. Maybe it affects your job. Maybe it affects your ability to get to work. I don't know. Whatever the thing would be, it affects you. You file suit against the county for doing that, and you win. As things are right now, the county commissioners that put that in place feel no pain from that, because if even say you got a monetary award for that, the taxpayers pay it. They don't care. It doesn't touch them at all.
You would have to be able to sue personally the people on the council, right?
That's the point, that they are personally responsible for what they do. Now, if you did that, think about now somebody putting this contract in front of you, this proposal to take this grant money, and you're looking through there saying, oh, I don't know, well, this is going to damage some of my people. I don't know if they're going to like this. Well,
right, but what's the current legal situation of whether the individuals in the office are responsible or not? Which is it?
For the type of thing we're talking about, which is putting regulations in place and all that, there's no consequences.
So they're not liable?
No, they're not liable.
Okay, so that could be a really huge problem, because it's just like drug or vaccine makers saying, if they kill your family, who cares, because they don't have to pay for anything. And
we did 10.
Yeah, it's just a misunderstanding, and with the people on a city council, if they're immune personally from lawsuits like that, I mean, is that in the city charter or something? Where does that immunity come from?
It's I can't answer that directly, exactly where it comes from. In the county I live in, which is one of the worst in implementing these kind of things, they've had several lawsuits filed against them, and in a few cases, some people have won. But again, the county, they sued the county. So
the county just increases taxes enough to pay the fine. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what a great deal, huh? Don't you wish you had one of those?
I'm just really interested in solutions, and what you've pointed out is something that makes solutions difficult, because these guys can do whatever they want, and it can ruin the town or the county, and they're still feeling fine about it.
Yeah, you want something difficult, think about trying to get a bill passed, whether it's in the state legislature or even in your local community, that your elected representatives are going to be personally liable if they do
I'm sure they'd vote for that.
They're the ones that are going to vote for this. Right. But we have, and as I said before, we are starting to get some people running for office who are good, honest people. They've been in the battle. They understand what's going on. We're starting to get them. It's baby steps, but we're starting to get them. If we could get, for example, up the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, clear up in the middle of way nowhere up there, I got a phone call from a chairman of a planning commission, which is normally in my world the enemy.
Right.
Called me and said, what can I do to keep these programs from being put in place so we can keep it out of our community? What happened was the local community rose up and they took control of the county commission, and they now control the planning commission and everything. They got the right people elected, and they are doing everything they can to keep this out. And that's under massive pressure because HUD and EPA and Department of Transportation are pushing them to accept these programs. But they have the right set of attitudes and right mind, and they're fighting with everything they've got.
Wow, that should be publicized everywhere.
Yeah.
As an example. I'm also wondering, since we've established that the federal government does most of what they do illegally against the Constitution because there's no penalties for violating your oath of office, it's considered to be fine and normal. Is there something analogous to that happening at the state and county levels, where there are, at the state level, there's a constitution, at the county level, there's probably a, what do they call it? Word just skipped my mind. In the county and the city, there's, I can't think of the word. It's not a constitution. It's what has all the. It's usually a charter, and it's got all the rules of how to run a county and a city. Are the state and the county and the city violating those with impunity, just like the federal government is violating the Constitution?
I think pretty much. There have been attempts, for example, on the property rights issue, as we've begun to fight these things, to try to create legislation that protects private property. Alabama got such a bill passed. They've tried it in Michigan. They've tried it in several other states to do Florida and so forth. And the trouble is that they don't write them properly, and they don't define their terms. And so even though they haven't passed a law that says we're going to protect private property rights and you can't bring this UN stuff in here and all this, the guys who are perpetrating all this go and say, oh, no, this isn't that. This is
they just bring it in and say, well, this isn't UN stuff. This is totally different.
Yeah. One of the things that was done in Florida, they were successful in passing legislation that overturned the ruling that every community had to do a comprehensive development plan. And they said you can still do one if you want to, but it's no longer required by the state of Florida. And that did get through, and that has helped in a great deal.
Okay, all right. So you have to get people elected who are willing to not take the money, number one. And I suspect that although there's not that many people who have thoroughly read and understand the federal Constitution at this point, there's a lot less people than that have thoroughly read and understood their city charter, county charter, or state constitution, and that really probably should be done by everybody.
Should be. I believe, working with these issues as long as I have, and I understand that what we're talking about here is massive. We've gone through the entire education system. We've gone through property rights and free enterprise and all that. And how do you wrap your head around? Where do you start the fight? Where do you go? But as I've studied this over the years, what I've seen is if private property is defended to its utmost, then they can't impose most of this. And so as I go around the country speaking, I advocate focus on private property rights. And if you just do that, then you can turn a huge amount of this around.
Okay, so if, for example, if you're in a city or in a county and you have private property or you want to defend private property rights, don't you still have to read the governing documents of that jurisdiction to know where they are violating it?
Sure you would. Yeah, but let me go with this. And one of the things is having a good definition. And over the years, as we've researched this, trying to find a good definition, we find lots of lines from founding fathers and so forth about what private property really is and everything, but a good legal definition. As these programs have been put in place over the last couple of decades, courts have suddenly had an increase in cases about usurping private property. And the state of Washington, for example, realized that they didn't have a good definition of what they mean by property. And there's particularly on the state Supreme Court that was hearing a lot of these cases. And so one of the justices, his name is Richard B. Sanders, back in 1997, decided that he needed to write they needed to have a good definition to follow this, and he came up with this. Can I read this?
Yeah, sounds great. Go ahead. Sure.
This is the definition he came up with. Property in a thing consists not merely in its ownership and possession, but in the unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Anything which destroys any of the elements of property to that extent destroys the property itself. The substantial value of property lies in its use. If the right of use be denied, the value of the property is annihilated and ownership is rendered a barren right. Now, that is the best definition I've ever heard.
That's beautiful. And the fact that they're, running all over that is probably because they agree with that definition and they're using it to make sure they take it away.
Absolutely. And the whole point of it is use. Your use of your property. And every one of these rules and regulations they're putting in place is denying you the use of your property as you, the owner, sees fit. And I'll tell you, I used this. I met with some activists in Oklahoma a couple years ago, and I gave them this definition. And a legislator put together a bill to protect private property. Unfortunately, all he used was the first sentence that talked about the unrestricted right of use. Oh, that word unrestricted. He put that in there, puts the bill in. The NGO groups in the state, the planners, all that, went ballistic. And they went all over the state, to city councils, to mayors, and so forth, and they said, if this law is passed, you will not have the ability to have zoning laws. You will have lost all control of the property in your community. And they rose up and stopped the bill. And that's what they'll do. They'll come at it, that way. Unrestricted right of use. Well, here's the thing, Richard. Since human society has had settlements, there have been nuisance laws to protect property owners from a neighbor who has a, you know, the example they always use to make it sound horrible is, what if somebody put a smelly old pig farm next door to you?
Sure.
You know, has loud music, has bright lights. There are nuisance laws that you can deal with that on an individual level. What they're trying to do with smart growth, sustainable development, community planning, all this kind of stuff is a one-size-fits-all regulation that dictates everything you do on your property. And if you let people have their property and live on it, and they have a dispute with a neighbor, they can settle it. They always have.
Right,
you know,
right,
but that's been taken away. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Well, one thing that I want to make sure we cover before we're done, because this time goes really fast, is I read your latest book before we had this appointment, and I think it's a fantastic book. I'd like everybody to be able to read it, and I thought if you could give kind of an introduction and tell what it's about and how it's tied into everything we're talking about, that would be great.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like a movie preview kind of.
The title is Erase, and this was the first time in my life I ever wrote fiction. It just kept coming. I don't know where it came from, but the idea is this very world we're talking about, this sustainable development communities, everything is controlled from the top up. I have in the book, it's a murder mystery. I mean, there are people who turn up dead, and there are these powers in place that are dictating, and a weak president who's being dictated to, putting things in place. And I have 5 different heroes. One is a teacher, and that gets the education angle into it. One is a publisher, and he publishes books. And one's a political activist, and one's a preacher, and one of them is a character we call the graffiti bandit. Mm-hmm. And he's a very mysterious figure. And what's happening, every single issue every program that I have brought into this book is actually real, actually happening. A lot of the dialogue are things that actually have been said, and some of the scenes in it actually took place. But I've created it in that there's a search on, there is a document that has all the answers in it. Who's behind this? What's their full plan? Where are they going with it? And there's a search on to try to find that document to get all the answers. And every single time somebody finds it, they end up dead. How is that happening? Whatever, that's part of the story. And this is about these folks trying to find the solution and solve it and get to the bottom of it. But what you find out, what people have told me as they've read the book, is that they read all kinds of the policy documents that we put out and everything, but putting it into this fiction form, in a story form, they get it much faster than they would reading the policy books. And I have been shocked that I've gotten reviews of the book. Several reviews have compared it to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, to George Orwell's 1984, to Michael Crichton's State of Fear, and just kind of bring all this stuff together to show what it's all about. I've got a teacher who's been warned that he no longer can teach academics in his classroom, and a publisher who is finding out. One of the main parts of the story is that the books are textbooks and just regular reading books and everything are being replaced with e-books, Kindle books, that kind of thing. And what they begin to discover is, my teacher begins to discover, those books can be changed. They whole storylines are disappearing. Anything that has to do with the ideas of individualism, free enterprise, limited government, they can't find it anymore. It's disappearing. And one of the storylines is that this force that is controlling these e-books has now made a gift to the entire public school system of their e-books, that they no longer have to buy textbooks. That'll save them millions of dollars. But they start to look at the curriculum and what is in there. And what's interesting about that is just a couple of weeks ago, I found a story of a school in New York City that was throwing out all of their books, and they were starting to have the kids use nothing but ebooks.
Wow.
In their curriculum. I just fell on the floor when I read that. You got to be careful what you write. You get these nice ideas. But that's and you can go to. We have a website called erasenovel.com, and you can see all the reviews of it and a synopsis of the book. You can get it on Amazon. It's available there. It's the title is Erase, and so that's it.
Yeah, it's incredible. I agree with the reviewers. It was really amazing, and right when I heard about it from you for the first time, we were talking before that about this problem of I told you the reason I don't like ebooks is they can be altered or disappeared at any point, and you said, "Well, I just wrote a novel about that," and I got it.
Well, if you watch the History Channel, and they run every night another documentary on the Nazis, and one of the everlasting visions that you have in your mind of the Nazis is these massive bonfires of burning books.
Yeah.
And everybody says, "Look what Neanderthals they were! They're burning books." Well, today we don't have to have that image anymore. All you got to do is press a button, and they just disappear.
Right.
How clean and nice that is.
The censorship is really ramping up right now on all the social media channels as well. That
too, absolutely. Yeah,
I've seen that recently.
So there we are.
Yeah, as I guess as kind of a wrap-up point, what do you want people to go away with as far as understanding not only what is going on now, but what everybody can personally do or be aware of in their own life?
Well, we are experiencing a global revolution by a force that wants to control. It's no different than the Genghis Khans and the Stalins of the world, or the Hitlers, except that they're not having to fire a shot to do this. Their goal is to change human society. That's exactly what they're doing, and they're getting the people to say, "Okay, that sounds good to me," and they're dumbing people down to the point that they're not able to understand it. However, there is a growing movement of people. I'm excited about it. It's baby steps, but it's growing, of people getting it. I think they have really stepped forward faster than they should have, because people are seeing what we're warning them about, and so there is a movement growing. You can go to my website at AmericanPolicy.org. We've got 15 years of archives of articles written on all these different subjects, and I think you can find an awful lot right there.
Okay, yeah, this is a huge void in most people's education, and I would definitely say that's an incredibly valuable site to go and start filling in the gaps. So, thanks for being here, and I hope everybody reads your book, and hang on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here.
All right, thank you.
Okay, everybody, there goes Tom DeWeese, president of the American Policy Center, and their website, as we mentioned during our talk, was AmericanPolicy.org. And I'm always inspired when Tom comes on the show. His work is an example, I think, of what happens when expertise and talent is combined with a desire to serve humanity. And when those two things get together, it's fun to watch the results. And after all of the details that we went over, I like to kind of boil down complex situations to the basics, so it's easier to understand what the situation really means and how to respond. And I would say, from my own research, that Agenda 21, as Rosa Corey said, is designed to inventory and control every living and non-living thing on the planet. Rosa Corey's great, by the way. She's got a lot of good videos on Agenda 21 on YouTube that you can see for free. One of them that I really like is called Behind the Green Mask. That's a few years old, but it's totally relevant to the whole thing. And Rosa, if anybody shares this archive with you, or the show, or you happen to be listening, please email me. We want you on the show, and I've been trying to get you on for a while, so email me if you can. Anyway, Agenda 21, as I see it, is one of the various assaults going on against humanity, and it's designed to destroy life on the planet. When you just get through all the details and get to the bottom line, that's it, as far as I can see. And total surveillance and control are steps on the way to extermination of all normal life on the planet. All these other things that are going on at the same time, the GMOs and the nuclear power and the chemical agriculture and the drug medicine, and all these things are tied together. And the reason the program is happening is not some technical difficulty or oversight. It's because there are malevolent people in top positions of power in government and corporations. And it's all become corporations, as Thomas mentioned. And the actions that they're seriously working on with great focus are meant to produce massive pain and trauma and eventually destruction. So like Tom said, and I agree, getting good people in positions of power, not just in government, but also in corporations, which are acting like governments too, that's really worthwhile. G. Edward Griffin has a program called Freedom Force, and there are others working in that direction. Alex Jones has been highlighting, or showcasing, I should say, people, really good people running for office on his show. We've done a few of those ourselves. And I would add that in addition to getting people to run, good people to run for office and get elected, that people who are already inside the system defecting from the plan of destruction can be incredible help to the whole program of healing the planet. And those who are knowingly participating in the destruction and they think they're going to get some kind of personal benefit from that, even the ones on the very top, those of you who are listening or monitoring the show, I'm just a radio host, but I would recommend that you reconsider very deeply what you're doing, because there's a law of nature that operates in situations like this and all others, and it says whatever we do to or for others comes back multiplied. And it doesn't matter if you believe in it or what religion you are or anything like that. It's still operating. It's part of the design principles of 3D life that we call reality. And the result of going along that line and knowing about it is not what you've been told. It's not a good outcome for yourselves or your family or any of us. So if you reconsider, you still have an opportunity right now to play the part of an incredible hero savior, like a fireman going into a burning building. You can actually have some very good results from changing course even at this late date. And I would say to everyone else who's not knowingly participating in the destruction side of things, that you are also not what you've been told. You're not the helpless, weak, unintelligent, dependent person that the government likes to make you into it. You're tremendously powerful, not just in the sense of getting better people in office, but really because of who you actually are. That is probably the biggest forbidden piece of knowledge, even more than what's going on with vaccines or, what the United Nations really is. What you are is the biggest secret. And you're not supposed to know about it, because it would really get in the way of the plans for destruction, to know that your normal state is super high energy, fantastically good health your whole life until you're ready to leave. A very clear mind, which is tied together with health, a natural desire to help others, great healing power, not the helpless, weak, fearful being that's wanting to hurt everybody else or fight between groups. We're not inherently that dumb. That's been engineered on the whole society intentionally, step by step, for a very long time. So besides the efforts to get good people in office and stop tyranny, to maximize the chances of our success, in my opinion, we also need people who are brave enough, and it takes a lot of courage, willing to change and discover who they actually are. That's harder than facing 100 enemies on the outside. So if that is any interest to you, and this is just a note for those people that find this appealing, you should join us on Saturday nights if you have time, or listen to the archive if you don't, or if you're in the wrong part of the world. for the time zone, etc. It's the same times, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific and 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, Eastern U.S. time. blogtalkradio.com/LostArtsRadio, just like the one that you're listening to now, which is the Sunday show. And I'm just really grateful to you for caring about these things at all and being here, and tell others, if you think they might be interested in the show. And if you want to help us and you have financial resources, you can donate to our work and keep us going, which I would deeply appreciate, because we're not really doing anything for money. I'm looking at how we could add something that would create the cash flow that we need to expand this project or even keep it surviving. But the thing is, I just won't take on anything or sell anything that would even remotely compromise the energy and purity of the project, because that, if we do that, the whole thing's lost and it's a waste of time. But I'm convinced that there are ways to combine large amounts of resources financially without compromising any of the energy of a project like this or others. And I want other people to be able to spend their lives doing jobs that they actually love and don't hate. So I'm starting to turn the attention that I put on the health research into money, because I can see also that, as we've been discussing, money is used, like, how they bribe the cities into signing away their freedom and the freedom of their residents. Money is used all throughout the world and human society to corrupt people, movements, organizations, groups, meetings. And I think it's time that people with really totally good motivation figure out ways without the corruption to generate so much money that it will just overcome, or I would say give them the means they need on the physical level to do the most good with the work they're doing. So in any case, if you want to help us even a little bit to keep on the air and doing all the things we're doing, there's a donate button on lostartsradio.com and also one on lostartsresearchinstitute.org. And there's also a mailing address in case you don't want to give a percentage to PayPal, which I totally understand. It all goes to the Research Institute to keep this larger project going and hopefully build the school that I've talked about on the air before, that I think is important. And if it's meant to happen, then the resources will come to do that from somewhere. It's a pretty expensive project, but any little bits toward what we're doing that you guys want to contribute will really help. So please consider that. Now, if you're struggling for money, do not donate anything to the Institute, okay? Just take care of yourself and your family if you have one, and the things that you need, and just tell other people about the show and send us good energy. And because I really don't want you to use any of your money for helping us if you're having a hard time yourself, okay? Just give us your good energy. Also, for everybody, just go to the site, because you can sign up for the free newsletter that's pretty interesting information every week, and tell us more about the upcoming shows. And there's educational articles and videos that we put up as often as we can that you might find very valuable. Some of them are great, like the ones on vaccines, lethal injection, the story of vaccination. I mention that all the time from Clint Richardson. All those things are posted on the site. Alex Jones's news show, which is, I think, incredibly valuable and has done more good for the planet than most people have any idea. That's on the site in the form of a playlist, and I recommend that you go there and take advantage of that as well. It's free, and a lot of the commercials are removed. So even though his sponsors tend to be really good, but take advantage of Alex's show. There's a new Facebook group that Emily has started for us. Go there on Facebook. It's Lost Arts Radio. And also send comments and questions for the Saturday show. If you can't participate live and call in, or you're in the wrong part of the world to hear it live, or it's bad for your schedule, just send me an email, richard@lostartsradio.com. Let me know what you'd like discussed or answered on the Saturday show, and I will do my best to do that. I'll read all of them. Make a note to join us next Saturday for that show. You can call in if you want to. 657-383-1002, and we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, have a great week, and I'll talk to you then. Thanks.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio/profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one strike and you're out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
Well, you came to me, and I never believed that you'd rescue me from myself. You saved this girl from a lonely world, and you stay here watching over me. It's more than I ever had wished for, you and me. I'm so lucky you found me. Now our two hearts will be as one. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. I'm so happy I got lucky. I keep winning when you're around. I'm so lucky I got lucky with you. never